What drives someone to kill? Is it rage, revenge, or something more sinister? Today, we're diving into one of the darkest motives, the need for power and control. Power, control. These are what push certain killers beyond reason. It's not just about violence, it's about domination, manipulation, and playing God. The ultimate satisfaction for them is deciding who lives and dies. No killer embodies this motive better than Ted Bundy. Outwardly charming, but underneath a predator who craved control. In this video, we'll explore how Bundy manipulated, murdered, and evaded justice, leaving his victims and the world with few answers. Bundy wasn't alone in his thirst for control. Many killers share this motive, and today we'll break down what really drives them and why. What is it about power and control that leads to murder? It's not just about taking a life, it's about complete dominance. But where does this need come from? For many, this drive starts in childhood. Rejection, neglect, abuse. Feeling powerless can fester into a desire to reclaim control, often violently. While not every difficult childhood leads to killing, for those with darker tendencies, it can fuel a deadly need for control. For killers like Bundy, this craving may stem from early feelings of powerlessness. They rewrite their narrative by becoming the one in control. These actions are calculated, not impulsive. Killers like Bundy plan meticulously, learning their victims' routines and orchestrating scenarios where they hold all the power. Control becomes intoxicating. It's not just physical, it's emotional and psychological. The act of stalking and manipulating gives them the power they've long craved. For Bundy, killing was more than the physical act. He reveled in the psychological manipulation, often tricking his victims into trusting him, feeding his need for control. Victims of killers driven by control suffer immensely. Their lives are torn apart by fear, manipulation, and violence. For the killer, their fear is proof of dominance. Before death, victims experience sheer terror as their autonomy is stripped away. The emotional toll is just as devastating as the physical. Killers savor the fear they create, relishing the moment their victim realizes they have no control. For these killers, it's about reducing their victims to objects, stripping away humanity until nothing remains but helplessness. The terror they inflict feeds their need for control. For the victims' families, the aftermath is unbearable, left with unanswered questions and devastated by a senseless loss. When we think of power and control, name that stands out is Ted Bundy. Charming, intelligent, and seemingly put together, Bundy was the master of manipulation, both of his victims and the world around him. Ted Bundy's childhood was not as straightforward as it might appear on the surface. He was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. But from the very beginning, his family surrounded his birth in secrecy and lies. Ted's mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, known as Louise, was only 22 years old when she gave birth to him. She had him out of wedlock, and back then this was very frowned upon. To protect their family's reputation, Ted's grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, raised him as their own child, while Louise was posed as his older sister. Years later, when Ted uncovered the truth, it reportedly shook him to his core, contributing to the deep confusion and resentment that brewed inside him. This early deception left Bundy with a fractured sense of identity. Although he later claimed his childhood was relatively normal, the rejection, isolation, and confusion he felt were early indicators of the need for control that would manifest in his crimes. Eventually, Louise decided that she wanted to rebuild her new life, and together with Ted, she decided to move to Tacoma, Washington. After moving, Louise remarried Johnny Culpepper Bundy, who legally adopted Ted, and Ted became Ted Bundy. But despite Johnny's attempts to bond with him, Ted remained emotionally distant, never accepting him as a father figure. As Bundy grew into his teenage years, he appeared like any other high-achieving student, intelligent, driven, and even charismatic. But beneath the surface, his struggles with identity and rejection were starting to take their toll. Bundy became more isolated, and his interactions with others grew more manipulative. He became obsessed with control, not just over people, but over how he was perceived. During his teenage years, Bundy's troubling behavior began to surface. He started to develop a fascination with voyeurism, frequently spying on women through their windows. This gave him a thrill of control, a feeling of power as he violated their privacy without them even knowing. It was an early sign of the disturbing path he was headed down, but no one around him knew of this secret habit. Despite these troubling tendencies, Bundy maintained an outward image of normalcy, graduating high school and moving on to college. It was during his college years that Bundy's violent fantasies would begin to manifest into something far more sinister. In 1965, Ted Bundy enrolled at the University of Puget Sound. Like many young men, he struggled to find his place, switching majors and feeling directionless. But there was something different about Bundy, something darker beneath the surface. At first, he was just another student, but Bundy's discomfort in social settings and lack of confidence plagued him. Even as he studied, he felt like an outsider, an internal struggle that would shape much of his later behavior. In 1966, Bundy transferred to the University of Washington and found his academic focus in psychology. Psychology became more than just an academic interest. It was a tool for him to understand human behavior and later manipulate those around him. It gave him insight into how people think, behave, and respond, lessons he would put to terrifying use. Bundy's time in college also marked the beginning of his first serious relationship. He met a woman known by the pseudonym Stephanie Brooks. She was everything Bundy wanted, beautiful, sophisticated, and from a wealthy family. For Bundy, Stephanie represented the life he felt he deserved, but could never fully have. Their relationship, however, wasn't destined to last. Stephanie eventually broke things off with Bundy, citing his lack of ambition and direction. For Bundy, the breakup was devastating. It wasn't just a personal rejection, it was a rejection of the life he wanted. This failure planted a seed of resentment and fueled his growing need for control, particularly over women. This breakup was a turning point in Bundy's life. He became determined to prove himself, but his need for control and power over others was becoming more pronounced. In the years that followed, Bundy's violent impulses would escalate. Shortly after his breakup with Stephanie, Bundy met Elizabeth Klooper in 1969, a single mother working as a secretary at the University of Washington. This relationship, which lasted for 6 years, allowed Bundy to project the image of a loving partner and father figure. To Elizabeth, Ted was charming, dependable, and attentive, qualities that masked his growing darkness. Bundy seemed to be the perfect partner. He was warm, supportive, and even helped care for Elizabeth's daughter. But while he maintained this facade, Bundy's fantasies were growing darker. Unbeknownst to Elizabeth, Bundy was leading a double life, one where control and violence were central to his desires. While Bundy played the role of a loving boyfriend and father figure, he was already fantasizing about murder. His need for control over women, stoked by feelings of inadequacy and rejection, was becoming unbearable. In 1974, Bundy's violent fantasies finally became reality. His first known victim was Karen Sparks, an 18-year-old college student. Bundy broke into her basement apartment in Seattle, assaulted her with a metal rod, and left her unconscious. Though Karen miraculously survived, she suffered permanent brain damage. This marked the beginning of Bundy's spree. In the following months, Bundy's attacks became more frequent and more brutal. In February of 1974, he abducted and killed Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old student. Her body was not discovered until over a year later. By the summer of 1974, women were disappearing across Washington, Oregon, and Utah. All of them were young, attractive women with similar physical features. Bundy had a type. Bundy's crimes were calculated and methodical. He lured his victims into his car by pretending to be injured, wearing a sling, or using crutches to gain their sympathy. Once they were close, Bundy would strike, rendering them powerless and taking them to secluded locations where he could carry out his horrific acts of violence. Between 1974 and 1975, Bundy abducted and murdered at least 8 women, though the true number is likely much higher. His ability to charm and manipulate his victims made him even more dangerous. He blended in, hiding his dark nature. Bundy's violent spree wasn't confined to one state. As his body count grew, he moved from Utah to Colorado, leaving a trail of terror across the American West. His victims in Colorado included Julie Cunningham, who vanished in March 1975, and Denise Oliverson, abducted in April 1975. As Bundy grew bolder, so did his need for control. But despite Bundy's efforts to remain elusive, his desire for power over his victims became his ultimate downfall. In August 1975, Ted Bundy's first real mistake would lead to his capture. While driving through a residential neighborhood in Utah late at night, Bundy was pulled over by a police officer for running stop signs. Inside his car, authorities found what they later called a rape kit: handcuffs, a ski mask, an ice pick, and other suspicious items. This routine traffic stop marked the beginning of the end for Bundy. Police connected him to the attempted abduction of Carol Durant, a woman who had narrowly escaped Bundy's grasp. His arrest in Utah was the first time law enforcement had a suspect in custody who could be linked to the disappearances in multiple states. Bundy, however, was not ready to give up his freedom. In 1977, while awaiting trial in Colorado, Bundy managed to escape, not once, but twice. The first time, he jumped out of a courthouse window, and after his capture, he escaped from jail by sawing through the ceiling of his cell. After his second escape, Bundy fled to Florida, where he would commit his most infamous murders. On January 15, 1978, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. In a brutal attack that lasted just 15 minutes, he bludgeoned and strangled 2 women, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, and violently assaulted 2 others. His rampage was savage, and even though some victims survived, psychological scars would remain forever. Just weeks later, Bundy struck again, abducting 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her middle school in Lake City, Florida. Her body was discovered 2 months later. This would be Bundy's final known victim. In February 1978, Bundy's luck ran out. He was pulled over by police in Pensacola, Florida, driving a stolen car. This time, Bundy couldn't escape. The evidence against him for the Chi Omega murders and the abduction of Kimberly Leach was overwhelming. He was quickly tried and convicted in Florida, sentenced to death by electric chair. The trial became a media sensation. Bundy, ever the manipulator, attempted to charm the jury, even acting as his own defense attorney. But his charisma wasn't enough to save him. After years of evading capture, Ted Bundy was finally held accountable for his horrific crimes. Even in prison, Bundy continued to manipulate those around him. During his trial, he proposed to former co-worker Carol Ann Boone, who accepted his proposal in court. The two were married, and despite Bundy's incarceration, they even had a daughter together. Carol remained loyal to Bundy until his final days, though she eventually left him before his execution. In his final years on death row, Bundy gave interviews, revealing chilling details about his crimes. However, he never fully confessed to all of his murders, keeping many details to himself. Some believe that Bundy enjoyed maintaining a sense of control over law enforcement, even in the face of death. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. crowds gathered outside, some celebrating the death of one of the most notorious killers in American history. While Bundy's life ended that day, the questions surrounding his motives, his psyche, and the true number of his victims remain unanswered. Ted Bundy's legacy is one of manipulation, power, and control. His ability to charm and deceive allowed him to evade capture for years, leaving behind a trail of devastation and unanswered questions. His story is a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a smile. So that's the story of Ted Bundy, a horrible, disgusting man, and honestly not as charming or attractive as some people claim. I wasn't there, but from the pictures, he doesn't look that appealing to me, probably because I know the unspeakable things he did. I do want to acknowledge, though, that I wasn't able to mention every victim in detail. There were so many young girls and women whose lives were tragically cut short, and for that I deeply apologize. Some victims remain unknown to this day, which is heartbreaking. My thoughts are with all of them and their families. Let me know your thoughts on Bundy's ability to manipulate those around him. Do you think he could have been caught sooner? Drop a comment below. And if you're fascinated by true crime stories like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you next week.